It's got to be scones. It's got to be scones because actually I've had numerous people ask me, can you actually make scones that are plant-based? So yes, you can, but it's got to be scones because I've got tea in my hand. Although that is a regular occurrence, so. If I ate scones as regularly as I drink tea, we'd be in trouble. Scones can be daunting. I still feel intimidated by scones. So, you know, let's just work through this together is what I'm going to say. But this is not a difficult mix. I think there's all of those variations that can come into play when you're making scones. And, you know, this is why it's such a hotly contested category at the local show. Because, you know, it's to do with oven temperature. So make sure your oven is well and truly preheated. I've had mine on for probably 25 minutes now. So that's humming along in the background. That's at 200 and then I'll knock it back to 180 when I put the scones in, just so that you don't lose that critical spring that you want to have with your scones. The other thing that a lot of people talk about with scones, and I'm talking about the master scone makers here, is when you cut them, that's going to influence how they rise. So, you know, there's all these different techniques. I still come back to the good old scone cutter just because I haven't got a better result trying all of the other ways of doing things. This is a cool thing. I hardly ever get to use this, so I'm excited to show it to you. It's actually for pastry mostly, but I use it to just make sure that the flour and the baking powder that I'm going to put in here is evenly distributed. This recipe can be done with self-raising flour, but I have to tell you, and it's not a food snob thing, it's just a practical thing, I never have self-raising flour. I just don't. Because, well, I don't use it very often, so I always wonder if it's going to be fresh enough. But the other thing is that I like to know how much leavening I'm adding, or the rising agent. I like to know how much I'm adding, and I also like to know that that's really fresh. So I'm just going to make sure that my flour doesn't have any lumps and bumps in it before I add the baking powder. You can sift it if you want, that's always a good plan as well. I have 4 cups of spelt flour. Of course, these are going to be spelt scones because, you know, that's the other thing. Don't have self-raising flour and don't really have white flour in my house. So the baking powder, if you want to do a self-raising flour, you need to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder per cup of plain flour, and then you've got a self-raising flour. So I'll pop that in. And then I'm also going to add some icing sugar. Well, when I say icing sugar, you know I didn't just buy this from the shops. I just make my own. You know, it's one of those things that because I have a Vitamix, I can just pop this in the Vitamix. I know exactly what sugar I'm using. Then I can use something like this, which is just a natural raw sugar. It's not Rapadura. I have made icing sugar out of Rapadura before and it's beautiful, but obviously has a bit of a colour. So I don't know, maybe you're going to want to see those lovely white scones when they come out of the oven. So 4 tablespoons of icing sugar goes in. The full recipe will be on our website as always, so you can always go there and check it out to make sure you haven't missed anything. So while I'm cutting this up, if you do want to make your own icing sugar, then all you need to do, if you have a high-powered blender, is literally put the dry sugar in there. You don't want to go too far though, because if too much heat starts to happen in there, or if there's even an inkling of moisture in there, you're going to be in trouble. You'll start getting a toffee on your hands. So just do it until it's down to a fine powder. It's not going to be like the stuff in the shops because it's going to get lumpy, but that's okay. And then this is going to be our version of dairy cream. So it's a coconut cream. This is a really good thick one too. Can you see how lovely and thick that is? I mean, it's not coconut milk. This is the point that I want to make. So in this recipe, you want the fat aspect to mimic butter or dairy cream. So we want to use something that has fat in it. It's okay, we can have a little bit now and again, but just don't get a milk because that's going to be too runny. I mean, we're putting some milk in here anyway, but you want to get that lovely cream aspect. Okay, so that goes in, and then I've got 2/3 of a cup of soy milk, and we're good to go. I use a knife to just cut the flour into the liquid. You know, I've made scones with quite a few ladies, and they've given me some really good tips and techniques. I mean, if you live in the country for long enough, you're going to be asked to either come around for scones or bring scones. The latter's a little more intimidating, especially if you're going somewhere that people have been making scones for a really long time. I always say, I can bring tea. But one of the tips that a lady that I did some old school baking with gave me was to use a knife. So just a butter knife like this, and cut the flour into the liquid rather than, you don't want to compress it. Light hands was the other tip that she gave me. Keep just cutting that through, and you can see that it's coming together. Don't panic that there's not enough moisture in there. Scone dough should just pull together. It's not like a cake batter, it's not like a cookie mix. You just want to have enough moisture in there that once you shape it into a ball to push out before you cut it. I don't use a rolling pin either. So that's another thing that I was told. You don't want to take the air out. You want to have as much lightness in your scones as possible. So we're kind of at the stage now where this is not showing me any, you know, kind of leftover flour. Okay, so we've cut that in, and now I am going to use my hands. Just very gently pull that together, and it will come together, but you don't want it to be sticky and you don't want it to be too dry either. I know, that's just really vague, isn't it? You'll be able to see when this goes onto the board. If you do notice that the dough is really sticking to your hands just too much, then little bit by little bit add flour, but you don't want to add too much because that's going to, well, it's going to change the ratio of everything. So if you have a few, you know, flaky bits, don't worry about it. It's fine. Just take the bulk of your dough. I don't know if you can get a gist of the texture of the dough. If I kind of push my fingers around enough to give you an idea that there's a bit of spring in there, but there's nothing falling off of it. Is that making sense? Okay, I always just cut on the tray that I'm going to use. So you have a somewhat cohesive ball of dough. And then, as I said, I don't use a rolling pin, I just use my fingers to push that down. Okay, the idea with a scone cutter is that you want to press down evenly. And I know that a lot of people do the twist thing, but what happens if you don't get that exactly perfect is that your scones will kind of take on a leaning Tower of Pisa. And I'll be able to show you how that goes, I'm sure, when these come out the oven, because there's always the one rogue that will do that. So, you know, don't panic. Okay, now push your dough together again so that we can get the next lot. Make it roughly the same height as what we've made with the others. I should probably tell you what that is. I want to say an inch, and I don't even use that language, but that just looks like 2.5 centimetres maybe, something like that. You can brush a little bit of milk on these. I just don't do that anymore. I used to, and then it didn't really make that much of a difference, so Figured, oh, don't worry about it. Anyway, they go into the oven for 25 minutes. So remember, I had that at 200. I'm going to knock it back to 180 when I put these in, and then we'll pop the kettle on, won't we? Right, let's see if we win any prizes. Well, that one's nice, and that's pretty good. That's a good one. Yeah. Look, they're rustic, and that's what we do because this is a farmhouse. Plus, everyone's going to enjoy eating them. They're just, that's what happens when you twist it. It's a terrible habit that I have when I make scones. Anyway, so what do we do if we're not actually eating dairy? In lieu of a lovely whipped cream to go on your scones, you use coconut cream, not milk, coconut cream. So you'll have to prepare this a little bit ahead of time, so know that you're going to have scones the next day. The baking of the scones is easy, that's a 25-minute process, but you just want to chill the coconut cream down so that you get that solid cream that rises to the top, and then the liquid at the bottom you'll just use for something else. Throw it in a curry or into a smoothie or whatever you like. But you want the highest fat content so that you can whip it into a whipped coconut cream. Do the same things you would with a dairy cream. So I've added in some vanilla essence and then a little bit of my homemade icing sugar. The exact amounts will be on the website, so don't panic, but essentially I've used 1 can of coconut cream. It's going to depend how much cream you get out of that as to what the brand is, and you know how much water was mixed in with it, if there was any, all of that. So I don't want to be too exact with this other than to say pop 1 can of coconut cream in the fridge and then use whatever you get out of that, and just adjust the sugar aspect accordingly because not everybody likes it cloyingly sweet. I certainly don't. Okay, so with the trusty old Kenwood here, I've got the whipping mechanism on there and everything's in there already, that cold coconut cream, and we'll just give that a rev up. Country for serenity, it's a rather noisy process. But we do have some whipped coconut cream. Come on, drop off of there. That's good. And see how it holds? So, a little break with the scones. This is the very last of last year's apricot jam. We have a really old tree and it throws out some cracking fruit every 3rd or 4th season, basically, is how it works, you know, these things. Right, so we'll pop some jam on there. Okay, if we're going to get all old school, we're going to have to put some icing sugar on this as well. I would usually do that with either coconut flour or maker powder or mesquite or something other than a raw sugar, but you know, if we're going with the tradition of making scones, what the hey, let's just kick our sugar levels all the way up there. We've got good strong tea to help us out. So scones, spelt scones, made in 25 minutes, they're the easy part, and then a whipped coconut cream and whatever jam takes your fancy. Scones are back on the menu, look at that. So are you a scone maker? If you are, I definitely want to hear your tips and techniques because there is an entire kind of encyclopedia of tips and techniques when it comes to scone making, and it depends who you chat to as to how much information you can glean. Hopefully, I've been able to give you a few tips along the way, so share this with somebody that you know loves to have a little tea party, or you just want to give them the suggestion that they should make scones when they come to your house next time. Let me know how you go.